A hurricane is a tropical cyclone, in essence, a low-pressure system that forms in the tropics. They are usually accompanied by thunderstorms. In the northern hemisphere, there is a counterclockwise circulation of the winds seen at the Earth's surface. Hurricanes are categorized by the strengths of their winds by the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale. Therefore, a Category 1 has a lower wind speed compared to a Category 5 one. It should be noted, though, that a lower category hurricane can cause more damage than a higher one, depending on where it strikes and the dangers they bring.
A wetland is an area of land whose soil is saturated with moisture, either permanently or seasonally. Such areas may also be covered partially or completely by shallow pools of water. Wetlands include swamps, marshes, and bogs, among others. Wetlands may support both aquatic and terrestrial species. The prolonged presence of water creates conditions that favor the growth of specially adapted plants and promote the development of characteristic wetland soils. Wetlands vary widely because of regional and local differences in soil, topography, climate, hydrology, water chemistry, vegetation, and other factors, including human disturbance. Indeed, wetlands are found from the tundra to the tropics and on every continent except Antarctica. Two general categories of wetlands are recognized: coastal or tidal wetlands and inland or non-tidal wetlands. Coastal wetlands in the United States are found along the Atlantic, Pacific, Alaskan, and Gulf coasts. They are closely linked to the nation's estuaries, where seawater mixes with freshwater to form an environment of varying salinities. The salt water and the fluctuating water levels due to tidal action combine to create a rather difficult environment for most plants. Consequently, many shallow coastal areas are unvegetated mudflats or sandflats. Some plants, however, have successfully adapted to this environment. Certain grasses and grass-like plants that adapt to the saline conditions form the tidal swamp marshes that are found along the Atlantic, Gulf, and Pacific coasts. Mangrove swamps, with salt-loving shrubs or trees, are common in tropical climates, such as in southern Florida and Puerto Rico. Some tidal freshwater wetlands form beyond the upper edges of tidal salt marshes, where the influence of saltwater ends. Inland wetlands are most common on floodplains along rivers and streams, in isolated depressions surrounded by dry land, along the margins of lakes and ponds, where in other low-lying areas where the groundwater intercepts the soil surface or where precipitation sufficiently saturates the soil. Inland wetlands include marshes and wet meadows dominated by herbaceous plants, swamps dominated by shrubs, and wooded swamps dominated by trees.
Hurricane Katrina was originally a tropical depression in the southeastern Bahamas, which then became a tropical storm and hours before hitting Florida on August 25th became a Category 1 hurricane. New Orleans sits in a bowl that is preserved by levees that keep the water out. Before the hurricane hit, they were concerned because New Orleans is 70% below sea level. The mayor of New Orleans said that Katrina's expected storm could reach over 28 feet, which would capsize the levees because the highest of them were only 18. He also warned the people who were planning on using the shelters that they should bring food and water to last for days, and that the shelters would probably lose electricity. Also, that there was a chance there could be intense flooding that would be uncontrollable. They predicted that the worst case would leave New Orleans under 15 feet of water and be without electricity, clean water, and have sewage for up to 6 months. They also predicted that although the levees were higher than ever, Katrina was expected to be as strong as Hurricane Camille from 1969. The flooding would overwhelm the city's water and sewage systems, and that would leave the survivors in a bowl of toxic soup, said one top hurricane expert. They worried that if chemical plants started to come apart, they would release toxic chemicals. If all this were to happen, it could create severe air and water pollution. Also, since gas floats on water, they worried they could end up with some pretty severe and large fires. The storm was expected to be a Category 4 or 5 hurricane. The mayor declared a state of emergency and made a mandatory evacuation of the city on Sunday. 1.3 million people lived in New Orleans, and many started evacuating before sunrise. 20 to 25,000 stayed and tried to take shelter in the Superdome. Hurricane Katrina was one of the strongest storms within the last 100 years to impact the coast of the United States. When it hit Louisiana, it was a strong Category 3 hurricane.
Before Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans and the neighboring ecosystems were already at particular risk due to erosion. Between 1999 and 2000, Louisiana wetlands lost what is equivalent to one football field every 38 minutes. This process is accelerating. The erosion was mainly the result of human activities from development. In particular, many barrier islands and wetland areas were built up with homes. Barrier islands and their wetland habitats form an important part of the ecosystem's natural defense against storms. These islands, primarily composed of sand, form an effective barrier against storm surges, the huge waves of water caused by hurricanes. General wetlands also mitigate the severity of storms. During Hurricane Katrina, most of the flooding of New Orleans was caused by the storm surge, not by the wind or rain. By draining and trying to develop them, people make these areas less stable and prone to erosion. This occurs because the wetlands are primarily composed of sand held together by plant roots. When the land is drained and the plants are killed, the sand can be easily washed away. The infamous New Orleans levees also had negative effects beyond their obvious failure to hold back the water. The levees changed the natural flow of the Mississippi River into the Gulf and kept it from overflowing as it had naturally done before. This overflowing was important because it replenished the land with silt, which helped to keep it above sea level and helped provide nutrients to plants. This counteracted erosion and damage from storms. Because this natural process no longer occurs, erosion has accelerated and the effects of the hurricanes are worse than they might otherwise have been. After the hurricane, it was clear that the storm surge had had a devastating effect on the New Orleans area. It moved or destroyed many of the barrier islands and much of the coastal wetlands. The surge also carried salt water into fresh and brackish water ecosystems, destroying the delicate balance existing there and making it difficult or impossible for many plants and water organisms to survive. Because the salt killed many plants, it loosened the sand and soil and caused further erosion. Further inland, the salt leached into soil and killed trees, meaning that less oxygen would be released into the air and less carbon dioxide taken from it. When the storm surge swept through New Orleans itself, it washed debris and other contaminants into the wetlands. Luckily, the many chemical plants and refineries in and near New Orleans were not greatly harmed by the hurricane, otherwise the pollution would have been much more terrible. However, the chemicals washed from the breeze, for example, bleach, still hurt the ecosystem, polluting and damaging soil, ponds, marshes, and saltwater, as well as the creatures that lived there. Because of the lack of foresight shown by developers and many people living in the New Orleans area, New Orleans is now more vulnerable to storms than ever before. Beyond which, many scientists postulate that with global warming, hurricanes will become more frequent and more severe. As a result, the current form of life in New Orleans is not sustainable and will probably become more and more threatened in the future. However, the increasing difficulty for human development in the area is in fact good news for the local ecosystem. These organisms have survived hurricanes for thousands of years as a natural cycle of life in the area. As a result, without human-caused degradation, they should bounce back eventually. The real danger and damage exists from the changes wrought by humans, and this may force some species to adapt or die.
Mangroves live in wet saline habitats. Their growth is determined by tidal changes, elevation of the land, and the salinity of the soil and water. Mangroves can survive in temperatures over 66 degrees Fahrenheit, but cannot tolerate temperature fluctuations exceeding 18 degrees Fahrenheit or temperatures below freezing for any length of time. Tides bring nutrients and take waste from the mangrove communities. The tides also help with the transportation of propagules or seedlings of the mangrove tree. 40 species dominate 75% of the world's tropical coastline. Mangroves have root adaptations that increase the stability of the mangrove in the soft sediment. Mangroves also have an adaptation that allows for salt exclusion and salt excretion. Salt exclusion is the adaptation where salt cannot go through the membrane of the roots. Salt excretion is the adaptation where salt is removed through the leaves or the glands of the mangrove. Mangroves can also live in low oxygen sediment with the aerial roots bringing in the oxygen. Mangroves also have interlaced reproduction adaptations. Reproduction commences with dispersal, which is reproduction by flowering and pollination. Once they have been pollinated, the flowers are made on the trees, and then they germinate into propagules. The propagules then drop into water and either take root by their parents, or the tides and current push them to a different shoreline. Mangroves provide food for many organisms through their leaf litter, which gets decomposed by fungi and bacteria. Mangroves provide shoreline protection from erosion. They also serve as a nursery for fish and invertebrates. And lastly, mangroves also support threatened and endangered species. The following are possible adaptations. When flooding occurs, the arrow roots suffocate, meaning that oxygen is not reaching the root system. This could result in the death of mangroves. When Hurricane Katrina hit, major flooding occurred, causing the mangroves to suffocate. Because of the little that is being done to help replenish the loss of the mangroves continue to die because either they are submerged in water or under toxins such as the oil from the recent oil spill. Mangroves may have to change their location from soft, low-oxygen sediment due to the fact that their aerial roots will constantly be suffocated. Reproduction may have to change as well because the propagules might not be able to sink to the bottom if there's a thick layer of oil on top of the ocean layer. Reproduction might also need to be more successful in the way that every time a propagule finds a home, it will germinate because there will be very few mangroves to even allow for the dispersal of the propagules. Mangrove life will also be affected because of the decrease in the size of the mangrove. The leaf litter provides nutrition for many organisms that live in the roots of the mangrove, but if the amount of leaves decrease, so will the amount of organisms, because the mangrove will now provide a lower carrying capacity.
The brown pelican is the state bird of Louisiana, and until recently was declining due to ingesting pesticides. However, with more stringent laws, the brown pelican is bouncing back. This pelican is one of 7 pelican species and is characterized by its dark feathers. It has a long bill, an extendable pouch, as well as short legs and webbed feet. Brown pelicans use their broad wings to soar close to the surface of the water and then dive to catch fish, which they swallow whole. They only live in warm coastal environments and are never found near lakes, though they hunt in both salty and fresh wetland environments. They breed in the grasses on barrier islands and put their eggs in flat nests, normally hidden and protected by these grasses on the ground, though sometimes they place them in bushes or in trees. We speculate that with the changes Hurricane Katrina created in this ecosystem, the brown pelican will adapt in a variety of ways. The death of many freshwater fish will deplete its food supply, forcing it to dive deeper to catch a wider variety of saltwater fish. This would necessitate a larger set of lungs and a longer beak to reach deeper. Further, its digestion system would need to adapt to the toxins and trash that it would end up eating from within the fish that it swallowed whole. It would need to mate on land instead of on the barrier islands, since many of these would be destroyed. The pelican would also need to adapt its webbed feet to be better at gripping tree branches, since much of the grass it formerly hid its eggs in would be gone. It would also need to spend more time near its nest to defend its young and its territory, since the salt would kill many trees, and these would be difficult to come by. Its feathers would probably grow even darker to blend in with the dirtier water and duller surroundings from fewer plants.
Before Hurricane Katrina, there was a diversity of animals and plants. There was an abundance of brown pelicans, fish for it to feed on, and mangroves for the fish to take shelter in. After Hurricane Katrina, many things got destroyed and caused many adaptations to occur. As we can see, the mangroves greatly reduced in size, causing there to be less fish. Since there were less fish, the brown pelican had to adapt by getting a bigger chest and a longer beak. It should also be noted that the marshes where pelicans laid their eggs were also destroyed.